there is a power for good in the universe, we can use it, that nothing happens by chance, that we are all here by right of consciousness and a divine appointment. And as I address our viewing audience, you tuned in at this moment, the precise moment when the whole world is opening up. What's right with the world? What's right with life? And as we look at what's right with life, and we acknowledge that the ground of being truly is that we all came into the planet as beautiful spiritual beings of light. Not the original sin, the original blessing. As Reverend Matthew Fox, who is a Catholic priest, former, he was defrocked because somebody in the Vatican didn't like that he wrote the original blessing. But the truth is, energetically, we are the original blessing. And that when we look at what's right with life, at a DNA cellular level, energetically, that energy is flowing up through the heart center. Today, every Sunday, we make that longest journey on the planet, the 18-inch journey from the head to the heart. The heart is the doorway to the soul. And we know that energetically, when we look at pools of water and we feel drawn to the energy of water, that water is really the soul's ability to transform itself. And as we drink the water, and Reverend Basha Dernis, who was with us at Wednesday Night Live, talked about energizing our water and the drinking of the well that is forever expanding, the well that is really a universe within itself, the well that never empties, the well that is ever expanding. And as we come together on this day, as we acknowledge that we were drawn here in community, and through this community that we are growing and unfolding, that we are relating one to the other and recognizing that really the form that our planet is taking is communities. And one of the stories in Dr. Marcus Bach's book, What's Right with the World, and I think it is out of print, but we can, we have our ways, we can go online and we can get things that are out of print. But he talks about that he was in Sydney, Australia, and there was a woman at the desk, and he was at the camera shop, and she was buying all kinds of film and going to film everything and take photographs. And so she was looking for her coin purse in her actual purse, and she couldn't find it. So she was going through everything, you know how we do at times, and we go through everything. And finally she just dumped it upside down and everything was on the counter, and she says, "This is what my life looks like. This is the state of my whole life, ever since I came from California, ever since I divorced my husband, ever since my kids are alienated against me." And she just sort of went off. And he said, "Now I have a preconceived idea that once you reach 40-ish, that there is a pattern that's established. And through that pattern, you can actually transform within the pattern, but you never go beyond the pattern." Until I met Penelope O'Hara, the woman standing there with her empty purse, finally finding her coin purse, and I extended an invitation to dinner. Be not afraid to entertain strangers, lest we entertain angels unaware, right? And he said, I invited her to dinner, and I wasn't really in one of my psychoanalytical modes, but she began to tell me her life story and how she was the victim of it all, and she was, she was the martyr. And he said, I thought to myself, she's so self-centered. She's so self-involved. She's so self-absorbed. And she went on and on. And finally, the evening concluded, and they made their goodbyes. And he said, I thought I'd probably never see her again. And then I wound up in New Zealand. And there, at the hotel desk, I saw this very lovely woman, and with this great rush of blonde hair and very wonderful voice. And I thought she seemed familiar, yet not. And I looked again, and he thought, that's Penelope. And he went up and said, so nice to see you. And she said, it's so nice to see you again. And he thought, can this be the same woman? The same woman that told me her life story and how she came over to Australia with a tour, and the tour wasn't working, and the people, they should have screened them really good before they had them come on the tour, and she left the tour because she didn't want to be part of the herd. could this be the same woman? And he said, there seems to be a transformation. And she said, I had the experience of experiences. And he said, with that, she drifted off. And he said, my curiosity was such that I called her. And I said, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Well, it was her last evening in New Zealand, and he said, I had to persuade her. I had to see, you know, my theory, my preconceived idea that, you know, by the time you're in your 40s, there's a pattern set, and you can transform within this pattern that has been set, but not go beyond it. I had to find out for myself. And so he said they had dinner. And she began to tell him that she found this guidebook, and that the guidebook said, you can go to a special island, Kidnapper's Island, and you can experience 100,000 gannets. And gannet is an amazing bird with this, it's sort of pelican-like. When I looked at it, it was like a cross between a pelican and a stork. It was graceful, yet had the long, amazing beak and amazing wingspan. And one of the things about the gannets is they were individualistic, yet they lived in their colonies, and they raised their young. And she was fascinated. So she decided she was going to go out to this island, walk the 6 miles, and you had to get there really early because if the tide came in, you were against the cliffs, you know, and that would be the end of it. So you had to time it just right. So she said she went to this motel. They woke her up at 4:30, and the motel manager tried to talk her out of it. It's cloudy, it looks like it may be rain, if it's bad weather, you know, it'll be very difficult for you to get there. And she thought, you know, he's just saying that. And no, he thinks I can't do it because I'm a woman. So she got, the energy of her nature came up, and she said, no, I'll be fine. Then she got into the cab. He took her over to where the ranger station was to get to Kidnapper's Island. And the cab driver tried to talk her out of it, and she thought, oh, he just wants to take me on a personal tour. He just wants it. She said, no, I'll be fine. She gets to the ranger. The ranger also says, you know, it's rather cloudy. It looks like it could be some weather. If the tide comes in against the cliffs, it could be very dangerous. You're not insured, and we do not insure you for the day. And she said, no, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. So she takes her little camera equipment and her little, you know, the hotel manager gave her a little lunch, and she puts that in her bag, and she tromps off, and she's feeling, for the first time in her life, so lonely as she looks, remembering in the tour guidebook where it said 8,000 miles from nowhere. And she looked at the craggy cliffs, and she looked at the clouds forming, and she looked at the gray sea, and for the first time in her life, she felt so alone, and she began to feel depressed. And she was hot, and then she was cold. She stopped, she took off her raincoat. She took her shoes and socks off so she could feel the sand under her feet. And she said, oh, for a moment it was exhilarating, and as she went on. But that amazing, overwhelming loneliness, and after an hour, and she thought, I should go back. And she goes, no, I can't go back. You know how the ego steps in and says, oh, he's going to say, oh, I knew she couldn't do it. So she just, you know, that energy just kept her going and kept her going. And she felt lonelier and lonelier, lonelier than she had ever felt. And she started thinking about her life, and how the jumbled up mess it was, and how she'd alienated her children, and how, you know, with the divorce, and feeling a lot of self-blame, where she always looked outward before this walk, she looked inward. And then all of a sudden there was an amazing bird that came in. It was the first gannet. And it was so majestic and so beautiful, it just took her breath away, and she stood there transfixed. And she knew there was a little rest hut up above. And as she walked further, she was so excited because another gannet came, dove deep into the ocean, retrieved its fish for lunch or breakfast or whatever it was. And she kept going. And she came upon the scene of 100,000 gannets, feeding their young, spreading their wings, preening themselves. She was in tears. Suddenly she felt a part of nature. She felt a part of the sky. And interestingly enough, the sky opened and a little bit of sunlight came in, as if the shifting of her mood had affected the weather. She began snapping the pictures. She began opening herself up to this spiritual moment of oneness in nature. Because certainly if we cannot find ourselves in nature, we cannot find ourselves anywhere. That it is the energy of nature that arises in the beauty and the recognition that there is something in the universe. There is a creative presence, an energy of light, whatever we choose to call our God, our higher power, Father, Mother, Yahweh, Jehovah, Atman, Buddha, it matters not. But at that moment, to feel at one with all of life, in all of nature, in the recognition that we are never, ever alone. And when she had been there and she saw the tide rising against the cliffs, there was no fear, there was no feeling of being left. There was just a recognition that there was a Land Rover that was going to come and retrieve her, but it didn't show up, so she just kept being there in nature with these birds that are so amazing, in community yet individualists. And in a sociological view, realizing that their colony was important. But what they were doing also was important. She thought about her life and about how she hated people, like Charlie Brown. You know, I love humanity, it's people I can't stand, right? Yeah. And suddenly, the recognition of her life and the value that it truly had was stepping above the circumstances and judging the circumstances, rising above it. Why can a bird soar? It takes itself lightly. And as she came off that craggy cliff and she got into that Land Rover, she left the old Penelope O'Hara that was a victim, that was a martyr, that looked outside of herself, that blamed everything outside of herself. She left her behind. And she embraced the new being that could fly high above all challenges. It could soar to the heights. It could acknowledge the responsibility of our own life and the freedom that that entails, because it's never about anyone else. And Dr. Bach said that as he sat there, you know, remember that his nephew wrote, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. He said, here was the perfect physical manifestation of rising above, flying high above, energetically, the experiences, the appearances, and all the conditions that keep us so earthbound. When we acknowledge the water is really the soul's ability to transform itself, so is earth beneath us. It is solid, and everything does look solid, and yet energetically, the quantum physicists say everything is in motion. Everything is the particle of God come together in whatever form that it's going to take. Now, I love native indigenous lore, and there's a story about a high chief who had 3 sons. And at each initiation, when the son was just about to turn 13, he would have them go out into the woods by themselves with a bow and 1 arrow only. And they would have to keep guard all night. And his 3rd son, who was very small for his age, and rather a bit timid and a bit fragile, he was coming upon his 13th birthday. And it was time for him to go out into the forest with his bow and 1 arrow. And so the little lad went out into the forest, the little brave, and he hid behind a tree, and it became very, very dark, and it was cold, and he was shivering. And he'd hear a crack here of a twig, and he'd turn, and it would just be a squirrel. And then he'd hear something over here, and he'd turn, remembering he only had 1 arrow to release. So if it was a bear, and he was out of arrows, he was up the tree, right? Absolutely. So he was there all evening, and finally, in the wee hours of the morning, he heard something very strong, and he turned with his arrow and his bow. And it was his father watching over him for the whole night. And why I love this legend so much is that no matter where we are, we're cold, we're shivering, we may have only 1 arrow to defend ourselves, but there is a loving, caring presence watching over us every single moment of our lives as we open that space to allow God to do what God does best. What's right with life? Life itself, the fact that we came into this world together, that the energy of life is for us, that no matter if we leave this world, there is one life, and that life is God's life. That energy can neither be destroyed nor created. It merely changes form. That we got to stop with the old stories. Any man, remember the Bible said, any man putting his hand to the plow and looking backward is not fit for the kingdom of God. We cannot look backward. We cannot dig up the past. It does not serve us. We have this moment, and this moment only. You know, I am a graduated Catholic, and one of my priest friends was telling me the story about a woman who would come and she would confess her sins. And she would come and she would talk about this very, lurid affair that she had, and she'd go into detail, and then I'd give her the penance, 10 Hail Marys and, 50 rosaries. And she'd come back week after week, and he finally said, "Daughter, you come every single week telling the same story of this illicit affair. You've been forgiven. You've done your Hail Marys. You've done your rosaries. Why are you back?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't know, Father. I just love to hear myself tell about it. I love to talk about it." And that's us when we repeat stories that no longer serve us. Stories that are in the past. What's right with life? This moment. The point of power is always in the present moment. And when we really understand that, when we really get that, we're flying with the beauty of the Ganas. We're flying in the energy of life above all of the challenges and the upsets and all the things that go on in the outer world. God and I are the majority. And when we can realize that there is a loving presence that's with us every moment, even the scariest moments in the darkness, when we feel that we're going through a dark night of the soul, there is a loving, caring presence watching over us. And as we come together today to look at what's right with life, I say, what's right with life? You are, right? You are right with life. And when we open that consciousness to a life to do what life does best by means of us, that is to live our lives in such a way that everyone and anyone who comes within our energy field is healed and uplifted in our presence. Do you believe that?
Yes.
We are living our lives in that way, and we are going where? Higher yet with love. Where are we going? Higher yet with love. Where? Higher yet with love. And so it is. God bless you. I love you, and I know this day is very, very special for each and every one of us.